Hello, Real Talkers. With a million questions to ask in my mind and not the whole time in the world, I feel bad even taking these few seconds from my viewers for introducing a man who needs no introductions. Whether you like him or you don't, whether he's a hero or not, he will leave no one quiet. Just hearing his name, you think of a James Bond movie or Mission Impossible. So let me speak no more and welcome Mr. Jonathan Pollard.
Thank you.
What an honor.
Honor is mine.
I've waited a long time, and in the meantime I had time to learn more and more. You know, I was just thinking that when I was turning 10, you were starting your prison sentence. And
well, that certainly makes me feel wonderful hearing that.
No,
my wife, Rivka, now first learned about me when she was 7, so I guess it's par for the course.
No, to think that I was just a little child and you had lived already a few lives, and I was sitting here together in Israel, and I'm interviewing you. This is awesome. And you're in Arutz Sheva.
Even better.
How much access did you have to Arutz Sheva when you were in prison?
Sometimes too much. Esther, alayha shalom, would send me each week a box of Israeli press clippings, stories that she would translate if they were in Hebrew, since I couldn't get anything with the Hebrew language in prison. So at the top of this package were all the printouts from Arutz Sheva. So she advised me, if I wanted a peaceful Shabbat, read that first.
And then go down.
And then go down. Descend, as she would say, through the Jerusalem Post and Ma'ariv and Makor Rishon and Yediot, and then at the bottom, Haaretz. And she said, save that, you might need it for other purposes. So, no, Arutz Sheva was with me throughout my entire ordeal. And once I got out on parole, I was able to actually access it, but I had to go to a store because I wasn't allowed to have a computer.
Right.
So I would go to a store nearby.
They had the old Sheva.
Well, it was an internet store. So I just sat down and ordered a coffee and, downloaded Arutz Sheva, and it was fun, And it's strange because the people following me didn't seem to have a problem with that, and so that was okay. I would buy them coffee as they were waiting in the car. So I kept up with Arutz Sheva both in prison and during parole. And of course now I'm overwhelmed. That's the first thing I read in the morning and the last thing I read at night.
And now you're in Real Talk, with Sheva.
And now I'm the subject, on the show.
Listen, you have a lot of people who, it's interesting when I said that I was going to interview you, a lot of people had questions, like I was gathering questions. This is called Real Talk. How real can you be with me?
I can be as real as prudence allows me to be. There are certain things I can't go near, and those things are pretty self-evident. Anything having to do with the material involved in the case, I can't discuss. Anything that's basically classified, I can't discuss. I can't even reference it. Luckily, there are other sources that I can reference and guide people towards to get a better answer. But those are really the only things that I have to be careful about avoiding. Everything else, I'm not calculating. I can't be anymore.
Nice.
So people may not like what I have to say, but I feel comfortable being candid in my answers.
How many lives have you lived?
Of the 9 lives that God gave me, probably 8 3/4. I'm on vapors right now. Rivka has kind of given me a new lease on life right now, and I'm very thankful for that. How many lives? A number of lives. But the 2 lives that I've enjoyed the most are to be the husband of Esther, alayha shalom, and now the husband of Rivka. These are the 2 lives that I especially enjoy.
I read also about Esther. She seemed like a very special person, and she gave you so much.
Well, as I've told people, she was my morah. And she was an extraordinary individual. I don't think I will ever run into someone as formidable as Esther as long as I live. Rivka comes very close, but the situation that Esther found herself in was something that really called for extraordinary heroism and smarts. And she was a good combination of both. Her writing skills were extraordinary. I've never known anyone in my life to write as well as she did. I look at a blank piece of paper, that's old school. I look at a blank piece of paper and I'm scared. How do you start? Where do you start? She would look at a blank piece of paper as an opportunity.
Right.
And I don't think she ever had a rough draft.
Incredible.
With me, I leave a pile of paper, but she would just write beautifully. And it came from her heart and her head, both. And it was something, when I finally got on parole and I was living with her, it was, this is the new prison that I'm in. Okay.
Again, the last...
Okay, what did I say on the last one? I can't
The blank paper, 1 second.
No, I'll cut in with that. You ready? No, it was incredible the way she would write. I would look at a blank piece of paper and freeze. And she used that or saw that as an opportunity. I would leave a pile of bunched up paper as my rough drafts, and she never left a rough draft. She would just write beautifully, write from top to bottom. And except for a few grammatical changes, it was a finished product at the end of that effort of hers. It was scary, when she went on hunger strike here. And I couldn't really do anything to stop it.
Right.
She was determined to push this to the end. And luckily it didn't come to that. But it was a very close run thing with her. And I told members of Knesset and other politicians, what kind of government do we have that allows a Jewish woman to starve herself on the streets of Yerushalayim? How can we allow that to happen? And some of them actually showed up to the Shiva, had the chutzpah to show up to the Shiva.
Those who were against it.
Who did not, worse than nothing. Mm-hmm. They undermined her. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know what to do at that point with them. Because Shiva is a solemn occasion.
Yeah.
And you're trying to talk about the person that left us in a dignified and honorable way. And so I was thinking, how would she handle this? So I praised them.
Wow.
I praised them to such an extent that they were embarrassed. And everyone started laughing.
It's emotional. This is a show of love.
Yeah, I have to conduct myself now in a way that brings honor to her memory. The last two things she said to me, and this really describes who she was, had to do with Rivka. One of the things she said to me,
Rivka was your new wife.
My new wife was marry her. So
this is incredible.
I didn't know what to say. She said, look, I'm not going to make it, and I want you to be happy. So marry her. She'll keep you on the derech. And she was right. Rivka is keeping me on the derech. The other thing she said, take your mask off. I was in the COVID ward at Hadassah. I think I was the only person ever allowed in there. But I had to wear like an army chemical warfare suit. This wasn't like a paper gown or anything. Yeah. The people were dying everywhere. It was like a level of Gehenna that I never could have imagined. I hope I never see that again. But she said, take your mask off. And at that point, I didn't care because I knew she was dying. So I took my mask off. And this is what she said to me in her last moments. they're coming for you. They'll be coming for you when I go. And I knew who she meant. These were the politicians. And she was the gatekeeper. She kept them all away from me so I could do my work. And she said, let me ask you a question.
I have it written here.
Let me
I
ask
can't believe it.
Let me ask you a question. What is politics? And I just looked at her and I said, sweetie, you're not going to live long enough for me to give you the full academic definition. So she laughed and she said, an idiot to the end. Okay. She said, well, I'll give you the short answer. And the short answer is, it's the art of compromise.
Love it.
What are you willing to compromise? And she was holding on to me at that point with her last ounce of strength. She said, the Maharat HaMachpelah, Hebron, Tekoa, the Temple Mount, Kever Yosef, Kashrut, Shabbat, what are you willing to compromise on? And I looked at her and I said nothing. So she said, remember that when they come for you. You do not compromise anything. So I said, okay, and then I just basically held her, counting her breaths, until there weren't any.
I'm so emotional. Wow. You know why I understand you, because I can really read, I read through your story. It was a real love story. You lived everything that you have lived. It was
the interesting thing about our marriage, which a lot of husbands and wives don't have the pleasure of enjoying or experiencing, is that we didn't have a physical relationship. Our relationship for 23 years, almost 24 years, was an intellectual relationship. She would come. She had to sit across the table from me. I couldn't touch her. I couldn't kiss her. I couldn't do anything. I tried a couple times and got whacked for it. But we had to talk, really talk. And so consequently, we knew each other very well. We knew each other before, but under these circumstances, we really got to know each other. So that when I came out finally, we just picked up where we left off in prison.
And it was just natural.
And it was perfectly natural. Of course, coming out, she was dying. And that was something that I, dedicated my life to preventing as much as I could. But her reaction to the diagnosis was typical Esther. The doctor told her, you have 6 weeks to live, get your affairs in order. So my heart went through the floor. And she said, well, that's your opinion. And he said, yeah. And she said, well, we'll see what God thinks about this. And she lived for 6.5 more years. Not 6 weeks, but 6.5 more years. I mean, it was horrendous. Her suffering was horrendous. But she always had a smile on her face. Always. So this was grace under pressure with her. And I was privileged to be with her during that time.
Incredible.
So when men, male friends of mine, doubt the ability of women, I caution them. I said, you didn't know Esther.
Nice.
You would be forced to eat your words if you ever said that in front of her. So, nice. Yeah, that was Esther, an extraordinary person.
The moment we chose this picture because it was very, very important for me, especially, for everybody. The moment you are coming down the plane, and I remember I watched it. It was Corona. We were all hooked on our phones, and I was watching it and I was crying. And then I sent to my mother who lives in Italy, and she was crying. And my daughter, who was 18, she stopped her TikTok and everything, and she took it and she was like, Emma, wow. You united generations with one thought, with one feeling. The love for Israel, the returning home. We were all together with you in that moment.
When we were coming in to Tel Aviv, it was the period between night and dawn.
Oh my God.
Very, very strange time. a beautiful time. And as we finally managed to reach the coastline, it just exploded in light. And Miriam Adelson insisted that we sit in the cockpit with the pilot and the co-pilot. It's quite a view. I would not like to do that again. It's pretty scary.
It's pretty scary.
And we said Tehillim.
Wow, I have the shivers. That's Miriam Adelson, who is the one who gave you the jet.
Correct. That was actually their private jet to come in, which was extraordinarily kind of her and her husband to do that. So as we came in, I noticed all the press. And I just looked at Esther and I said, oh my God, it was promised that there wouldn't be any press at this. And the place was just lit up. So when
Bibi was there.
Well, yes. So when the plane finally taxied and stopped, I looked out and there was Bibi.
You didn't know? No,
of course not. And I looked at Esther and I said, my God, Bibi is out there. What am I supposed to say? I don't have anything prepared. And she just looked at me very calmly and said, I'm retired now. It's on you. And yeah, that was pretty scary. I didn't know exactly what to do at that moment. But, you know, it was a very emotional time for me.
What was going through your head? Like, what were you, God,
what was
love?
Going, actually, right at that moment, I was going through what happened at the embassy so many years before.
Wow.
When I look back up at the embassy when I was being handcuffed, I was put across
in front of the Israeli embassy in Washington.
In the Israeli embassy in Washington, I was being handcuffed. And I looked back and there was my flag. It was a very cold, slate gray November day at the time. And I saw all the blinds in the building coming down like an eye shutting everywhere. And I realized that all of the dreams and assumptions that I had lived by over the years had just been utterly shattered. And when I came down the stairs, I said to myself, you sacrificed yourself for the land and people of Israel. I didn't really operate on behalf of any particular government or faction or politician for that matter. I felt that I was acting on behalf of the land and people of Israel. So what was the most appropriate thing to do? It was to say, I'm back, hello. We kissed the ground. I know that there were a lot of cartoonists that made fun of that, you know, showing Bibi as a king, standing there with me, showing, you know, obeisance to the king by kissing the ground in front of him. But that wasn't going through my head. You know, I put my hand up because he had the Tudat Zechut from me, and I just said, not yet,
First.
Please. And then Esther got down. And that was a very, I think, that was the highest point. That was higher than when I actually embraced her when I came out of prison. That moment was the most important moment, I think, of our collective life. Really? At that moment. It wasn't calculated. I hadn't planned on doing it, but it was just something that seemed appropriate at the moment. I was expecting to be whisked away in a car without any opportunity to say or do anything. And when I realized that wasn't the case, I didn't want this to be made into a political spectacle. I wanted this to be focused on what the real issue was, which was the defense of the land and people of Israel. So I got into some trouble by what I said later, when I said, you know, that basically Israel is our future. Come home. And there were a lot of leaders in the United States, Jewish leaders, that didn't appreciate that. Now, these are people that feel that the United States, in particular, and even Galut, is kind of, you know, a golden Medina. Yeah. So they didn't like what I said. Well, that's fine. I say a lot of things people don't like, and that one was one
You don't really care.
I don't care. I don't care at
right.
all. As long as what I say is temperate and is reasonable based on the facts that I can assemble to defend my position, that's fine. I'm not a bomb thrower. I don't like saying or doing things for the spectacle or the outrageousness of the situation. We're facing some real problems right now in the country. And unfortunately, the answers, if there are any, seem to be pretty conventional ones. And that's what scares me the most right now. These are unconventional problems that require, I would call, out-of-the-box thinking out-of-the-box responses. And we're not getting that.
But, for example, if I see the politics what's going on in America, I was just thinking, one of the greatest politicians who was against your release was Biden. Now you're here. Biden is there making a fool of himself.
Well, Biden is somewhere. I don't know where he is from time to time.
Yeah, he doesn't know where he is, but...
He's in his own world. Yeah, Biden made that famous statement on a fundraising drive down in Florida where he said it would be over his dead body that I would ever get out. And he went through the drill of denying it. There were tapes of him saying it. He then said, I can't remember that, which of course is believable. I just wish we all could forget what he said.
Exactly.
But
you're here now.
Yes, I'm here now, and I don't know where he is. So God is a comedian sometimes. He did some terrible things to me before that. When it was brought to his attention as the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee that one of the judges, the female Jewish judge on my appeal, had said that whenever there is a conflict between justice and procedure for the good of the system must always prevail. Well, that's pretty chilling.
Yeah.
You know, and so he was asked about that, and he agreed with that. I don't really know if he understood what the issue was, but anyone that could agree with that is really, it's frightening. So now we see that with his actions with his son, Hunter Biden, that maybe both of them should have been sharing a cell next to me.
That's exactly where I wanted to get to.
It's the hypocrisy is unbelievable. Look, the hypocrisy with him, with Biden, goes deeper than that. He's been lecturing us for several months now about how wrong our judicial review, not our judicial system, should be defended, and that our policy of changing things is wrong.
In the meantime, at home.
Wait, and at home, the minute the American Supreme Court issued 3 rulings that were totally against what the Democratic agenda was, he came out, and others in the Democratic Party came out in his amen quarter, echo chamber, saying these judges should be removed, they should be impeached, they should be arrested. The court doesn't represent the will of the people.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
Right. And I just thought to myself, with Biden especially, do his ears hear what his mouth is saying?
I don't think so.
And it wouldn't make any difference anyway. So this is Biden. And unfortunately, this is the United States as well. We waited 2,000 years in Galut, praying for the reestablishment of our country. We have the 3rd Jewish Commonwealth now. And unfortunately, we've fallen into the same trap that led us into disaster before. We've become a client state of an empire. And with a mad emperor now. Absolutely. Or a delusional emperor now. Totally. I mean, it's we could pick it up right out of the Roman Empire. Totally. I mean, it's we've got Caligula now, who's
supported mainly by American Jews. Are we the biggest enemies of ourselves?
Yes.
Thank you.
I don't think there's any question about that. In my case, I experienced...
Almost than you could.
Well, I experienced that up close and personal. I asked one Jewish leader, so-called Jewish leader, who came to visit me in prison, what if I had walked into your office with all the evidence at my disposal that there was an undeclared intelligence embargo against Israel that was endangering the survival, the safety and survival of the Jewish state? What would you have done? And he looked at me straight in the face and said, I would have had my secretary bring you some coffee, and I would have excused myself for a moment and called the FBI to have you arrested as an agent provocateur. And I said, well, what about the truth of what I was saying? He said, I don't care about the truth. You are endangering our position here. So he was candid, and I appreciated that. But, you know, what a lot of people don't realize is that one of the first things the government was trying to get me to do was to implicate a whole roster of American Jewish leaders in my activities. And I tried to get that information out to many of them who were damning me from one end of the country to the other. I wanted them to be aware of this fact. And
But I'm so curious. All that you do, all that you say, is it inspired by really love for the country and justice, which I believe, or is it really mixed with a lot of adrenaline and the need to always be on a conflict? I had an uncle, Alev Shalom, who was I call him a survivor only because he was one of two members of his family that got out of Germany. And he was on a voyage of the damned. And when he got near New York, he was told by his family members and other business associates of his father, who had committed suicide in Cologne after being humiliated in the streets, that we can't get involved. We can't get involved because our position here is very sensitive. So, hatzlocha. And he said he stood on the stern of the ship with three of his friends, tearing up these letters that had reached them, leaving, as he said, a floating indictment in the wake of the ship back to New York as they went south to find some kind of refuge. And he jumped ship off Trinidad with three of his friends. They died. He survived. And the lesson that he kept drilling into me was that each Jew has an absolute responsibility to safeguard the lives and welfare of their fellow Jews, even at the cost of their own lives. This is what I was brought up with. It was just drilled into me. You cannot walk away. That if you see a problem involving our community or even an individual Jew, you must get involved by whatever means you think is appropriate, but you can't walk away. Look, I was faced, and I talked to congressmen and senators over that who came to visit me. They said, well, weren't there any other options for you? Right.
And I went through the drill with them, and there really weren't any. And they said, well, why couldn't you just leave government and go to Israel? And I said, well, that would be a kind of a cowardly way out of the situation because the threats that compelled me to act would still be there, and I wouldn't be in any position to address them.
And it's your character to just not ignore, but...
Well, yeah, I'm the kind of guy that rushes into burning buildings.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, I do.
When was this time that you were, if you look back, when you were most scared?
Scared? During that entire period, up to the present day, it's when I was on the phone with Esther, and she said she had been diagnosed with breast cancer. And that was, and the time ran out on the amount that I had to talk to her that week. And it just clicked off. And I didn't know what stage it was at. I didn't know how serious it was. Well, it's always serious, but I didn't know exactly how serious it was. And I had to wait for 8 days in order to find out the details of her diagnosis.
You shocked me now, because I really thought that, I mean, it's terrible, but it's something that happens to a lot of people. I thought you were going to tell me something that's,
No, look.
No, this shows your humanity.
Well, look, my life was divided up into two parts at that point. The first part was with Esther, and the second part was the balagan that was going on, both legally, politically, in the media, here in Israel. And I remember the only other moment that I felt such despair, there were two moments that I felt despair, if I could call it that. One is when I saw the missiles coming in on Israel during the Gulf War, the first Gulf War. And I just kind of hung my head and I said I failed. Because the whole purpose of the operation was to prevent that from happening. The second time came when my mother was dying, and I asked if I could go see her.
And you didn't give.
And they said, talk, and you can go see her. Talk. And I said, I can't do that. My mother would be ashamed of me if I did that. And they said, well, that's the only way you're going to be able to see her. You give us what we want. So I said, can I write her? Because I didn't have any writing privileges. So a lot of discussion, and they said, yes, you can write her. So what does the son write a mother whose life is coming to a close? So for about a month, I wrote a letter a day, a long letter a day. So she died.
She never read the letters?
And about a week after she died, all the letters were returned to me undelivered. And even the security officer at the prison was appalled. He said, I don't know why they did this to you. I don't know. They could have just destroyed the letters.
Right.
And let you go on believing that they reached her.
Right.
You wouldn't know the difference. And but it was like dafka, they had to just put the knife in. And this is what I dealt with from the government for 30 years.
In all your process, where was God for you throughout all this time? Always with you, behind you?
There's an old expression that, God was walking with you side by side on the beach.
Yes.
Until there was only
that's beautiful.
one pair of shoes.
That's the.
And you said, where was God? He said, well, he was carrying you. No, when I was first imprisoned, it was deep underground in a bore. And it was in a prison that I didn't know about. And it was where they sent people where they wanted to really demonstrate how mean the government could be towards people. It was isolation. Real isolation.
Isolation means you don't talk to anybody.
Nobody. Nothing. I didn't have any books, nothing to read, nothing to see. And what happened at that moment when I sat down in this very small room, it was 2 meters by 2 meters by 2 meters, I just, I was given an option, talk or kill yourself. That's the only way you're getting out of here. Do what we want, say what we want you to say, or rot. And, Jews don't commit suicide. We buy retail. That was my joke at the time to kind of deal with this whole thing. And
which saved you.
So I sat down on this concrete bed, and I just said, I can't do this by myself. I can't do it. So this is beyond me. So I made the reacquaintance of Hashem. And I had a discussion with him. I negotiated, much like Avram Avinu, Lahavdil Lahavdalot. I negotiated with God that if I did a certain number of things and didn't do a certain number of things, that please save me. Please save me. That started actually a few hours before, when I saw this facility and I didn't know what it was. I'd never heard of it before. And the warden came out to see me, and he looked at me and he said, "You see the sky? Yeah. You breathe the air?
You'll never see it again.
You see the grass? Where is this going?" I didn't know what this was. He said, "When you see this again, you'll be dead. You'll be in a body bag, and you'll be an old man, broken, I promise you." And I don't know where it came from, but it was like I don't know where it came from. It just came out of my mouth. I said, "I don't think so." I said, "God runs the world, not you." So he said, "We'll see about that." And 7 years later, when I came up back into the light, he was standing there. And I have a problem sometimes guarding my mouth or determining time and place. And I just looked at him and I said, "Oh, of course, he was, yes." I was the last person alive out of that unit. And I looked at him and I said, "You see, God runs the world." I lost a tooth, but it was the sweetest pain I ever had.
I'm sure.
Because I got that guy really mad. Al Kiddush Hashem. I got him really, really mad. And that's good. That's good. So God, Hashem, was with me the whole time. And Esther was the one that made me understand that this was not so much a test for me, but it was a test for everybody. And that I had to act the way a real Jew should act. And that I shouldn't give in to despair, and that I shouldn't use profanity. And, I shouldn't do certain things that would let people think that I didn't believe in God, or that I didn't have Yirat Shamayim. That, by the way, is how I survived the next 23 years in open population, where people were dying right and left. So how do you live in a society like that? You have to be part of it, but so you're not suspect, but you can't be completely part of it, or you lose yourself. I knew a lot of people in prison that lived on hate, and boy, you can live a long time on hate, but ultimately it leaves you a husk, empty, and you die spiritually. And inevitably you die physically, either by a drug overdose, or you get into a fight and get stabbed, or you touch the fence and get shot down. But I was lucky enough to live on love. This was love of a good woman and love of Israel. And it was Kavod Harav Mordechai Yahu, who pointed out that the initials of both were the same, Arutz Yisrael and Esther Yocheved.
Wow. That's amazing.
Well, there are no coincidences. We don't, as believing Jews, we don't have coincidence. We don't believe in coincidences. So
you don't look back.
Look back?
Yeah.
I can't help but looking back to remind me of the evil that exists in society. Look, I saw the worst and the best in people when I was in prison. The worst I'll leave to your imagination. The best may shock you. There was a man dying in our unit of pancreatic cancer. And he had embarrassed the prison system by breaking out of almost every federal prison he had been in without hurting anybody. But he embarrassed them. So they weren't giving him any painkillers. And every night he was screaming.
He was with you?
Yeah, he was with us in the unit. And he was screaming for somebody to kill him because he just couldn't take the pain anymore. It was continuous. So one night it got really bad and we were all around him. my friends and I were around him, and I sat down on the bed. I held his hand, and I said, look, it's painful. We all understand that. But, you have to live. God says choose life. And he said, what life do I have? And, I didn't want to get into a philosophical debate with this guy because I understood, he was dying. He had nothing to live for. And at that moment, a guy we knew who had done about 35 years in prison for not talking, drug cartel, took off his pain patch, a Vicodin patch. Now, when you take it off, it leaves a blue line, and that's 5 years extra, day for day. And he was 1 week away from leaving prison to be back with his family, or what remained of him. And he took it off and slapped it on the guy. And we all looked at him and said, what did you do? Are you crazy? You're 35 years. You never talked. Your wife died, your kids are scattered, but you're going home to the remnants of a family. What are you doing? And he said, I can't listen to it. I can't stand here and not do anything. And this guy was about as hardcore as you could get.
And you ended up staying another 5 years?
No. What happened was some rat, ran and told on him, and they came and took him away. And the next day, there was something extraordinary that happened. There must have been close to 1,000 men of every color imaginable lined up
wanting to
by the internal security office to plead for mercy for him. Blacks, Mexicans, Asians.
He got it?
And I finally indexed up and came in, and they were shocked. They said, what are you doing here? You don't talk to us at all. And I said, this is what happened last night. And if you have an ounce of humanity in you, you can't sanction this guy. You can't give him another 5 years for being a human being in an inhuman environment. This is what God expects of us. So he said, you see that pile of shredded paper? I said, yeah. He said, that's the charge. He's going home. He said, my own wife gave me hell about this. So he said, I can't charge him with this. So when he left, it was extraordinary what happened. Almost the entire prison turned out. There were 5,000 men turned out to bid him goodbye.
Jonathan, I could stay here for the rest of the day. I really don't even see the time going. They're going to kill me. But, your wife told you about politics. I really believe now that you are there to inspire the new generation that needs to hear this. This is gold for people who are growing up in TikTok generation where everything is fast. You are, there's so much here to learn. And
I remember almost every minute of that situation. Why? It's a remembrance of what I should do and what I shouldn't do. There are some people that go to prison and come out worse than they were.
Yeah.
And there are others that go into prison and, believe it or not, come out better for it.
Right.
I fall in that category. I came out much better.
Because someone was holding you.
Because there were two people holding me. It was God and my wife.
Right. Right.
So, yeah, for this generation, to be perfectly honest with you, I've been shocked. When I came out, I didn't know what a cell phone was. I was walking down Fifth Avenue and I looked at Esther and I said, has this whole city gone stark raving mad? And she said, why? I said, they're talking to themselves. What are they doing? Did they let the asylum, open? Did they open it up? And she said, no, sweetheart, it's called Bluetooth. And I said, Bluetooth? What the hell is that? I have no idea what Bluetooth was. So, I remember I went to Macy's.
Did you know that Diana died and Camilla became a queen?
No, there's some things I don't want to think about at all. At all.
Right.
I don't know who's the queen really and who's the king in that relationship, but I don't want to go there too deeply. No, with this generation, the one thing, and I've had a lot of talks about this problem with the so-called quote-unquote vigilante action that took place in the territories.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've tried to tell people is that there comes a point in time where you look around and disaster is upon us, and people either don't care or are not aware of it and are willing to just treat you and yours as hefker.
Yeah.
And at that point, you have to do something. Sometimes it's the wrong thing, but it's out of desperation.
Yeah.
And this is why what I wrote in Arutz Sheva, in fact, in response to Rabbi Lichtenstein, and his intemperate remarks with regard to this vigilante action, was that in the absence of a clear government policy to defend people and to defend our rights to the land, God-given land, and to protect the rest of Israel from the possibility of another terror state being created right on the border of central Israel, what are people supposed to do? I mean, I ask the detractors of the vigilante action, so-called vigilante action, what is the alternative? What would you do in their place? And I never get an answer. And that's because they know what the appropriate answer is. So in the absence of a clear, decisive government policy to end terror, which this government that we have said was one of their stated policies. Unfortunately, I mean, it's kind of like Moshe Rabbeinu. He looked around and there was nobody there. And he had to take action. Well, was Moshe Rabbeinu a vigilante? Seriously, these are questions that I ask. He looked around. There was a Jew being beaten, probably to death. And he looked around for somebody to stop it. And there wasn't anybody.
Right.
So he took action. So was Moshe Rabbeinu a vigilante? I'll leave that question hanging.
But now that you're being here, you know, I want to close with this positive. I mean, it was all positive, incredibly positive, because you give a lot of positivity. But you walk around, people recognize you. You like being recognized?
I have no choice.
They just put your phone in your face.
I have no. Well, I found out that selfie is a Hebrew word. I didn't know what a selfie was until I came to Israel. I did have one bad experience with somebody. I was davening at the Kotel for Esther's life, and somebody put a phone in front of me between the Kotel and myself, with his head on my shoulder. And I just looked at him and I said, I'm trying to communicate to the Shekhinah, you know, from my wife. She's dying, please. Didn't stop.
Oh.
And on the other hand, you know, I've run into survivors, very old survivors, obviously, who come up to me and said, thank you for caring.
Wow.
So
that's amazing.
I'll leave you on this note. Esther was not in good shape towards the end, but she was still at home. And we got an invitation to go up to Ramat HaGolan. So she insisted on coming with me. And I said, sweetheart, you can't hardly walk. You know, you can't breathe. I mean, no, I have to come with you. So, all right, if you knew Esther, she wasn't going to be denied this. So I got her up there, and we're standing right on the border of Lebanon and Syria. And she looked at me and she said, what do you see? And I said, Hezbollah, because there were flags everywhere. And she said, look a little further. What do you see? More Hezbollah. So she kind of looked at me, pitying me, and she said, no. If you look far enough, she said, you'll see Eretz HaTzvi. And she said, unfortunately, I won't be around to see that, but you will. So may we all be zoche to see the realization of her dream.
This is beautiful. Jonathan, thank you so much. You made me emotional. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
It was very special, and it was definitely one of my most amazing interviews, for sure.
Likewise.
Thank you for what you have done for Israel. I hope you are as inspired as I was, and I'll see you the next one.